It's time for the Press Box Podcast. Hi, I'm your host, Ralph Miranda. Today I'm flying solo as my co-host, Joseph Miranda, is off fulfilling duties to his job as strength and conditioning coach with the Cincinnati Reds organization. Hopefully, Joseph will be back with us on our next episode. Today is episode 30 if you're counting at home. It's football time, playoff football time as well. We're going to talk about the college football playoffs just concluded, the semifinals, as well as the final game concluded a couple of days ago. We're going to talk about the NFL playoffs. We've just had the wild card round. We're getting ready for the divisional round and the NFC and AFC championship game, as well as the Super Bowl coming up in the next 3 or 4 weeks. We'll also talk about all the head coaching changes in the NFL and some of the thought process behind those searches and some of the names that have been out there as well. So we hope you enjoy this episode. We'll have a message from our sponsors, bonusroomart.com, as well as Mascots and Monikers, the new YouTube series. And of course, you can always go to my blog, theoldlinebacker.com. So sit back and enjoy episode 30 of the Press Box Podcast. Before we get started in sports, we just got done with the holiday season, which is always a good time of year. And you have more time during the holiday season to see movies and do things like that. And I wanted to touch on a couple movies that I saw that I really enjoyed. One was Aquaman, and I know some of you out there probably are not that hip on the Marvel comics and the DC comics, but Aquaman was a really good movie. I really enjoyed it. Lots of good special effects. The ocean atmosphere was really neat in the movie, and I thought it was well done, and that was a good movie. But the one that I really enjoyed was the one I saw last week, which was Bohemian Rhapsody. I really didn't think I would want to go see that movie because, I knew what it was about, but I really didn't know much about the inner workings of Queen. I guess I grew up in the Queen era, or they kind of hit their stride when I was in college. And then on after I got out of college in the 80s. But and I knew a lot about them. I liked their songs. But two things that I took away from that movie. One, I didn't know all the backstory of the movie. I have to admit, rather embarrassingly, that I didn't even know that Freddie Mercury was the lead singer of Queen. That shows you how much I know about groups. I like their music, but I don't really pay much attention. I didn't even know who Freddie Mercury was, to be honest with you. But obviously I found out that he was the lead singer in Queen and a little bit about their backstory. And also I didn't realize that they had so many hit songs. I knew about Bohemian Rhapsody. I knew about Another One Bites the Dust. Killer Queen, but I didn't realize that they had done Pressure and that they had done some of those other songs that we saw or that we heard in the movie. So if you haven't seen it, you need to get out and see Bohemian Rhapsody, especially if you're in your 50s or 60s and grew up in that era when Queen was big. It'll give you a new appreciation for the 70s and the 80s, and especially for Queen. And I come away from that thinking that it's hard for me to believe that there was a better rock group than Queen after watching the movie and re-listening to a lot of their greatest hits since that time. Just a great group, and obviously Freddie Mercury may be one of the greatest rock and roll singers of all time after listening to re-listening to the music and following some of his accomplishments. So enough of that. Obviously, movie's important. I really enjoyed it. I wanted to get that out. But let's start talking about some of the meat of what's been going on. Obviously, the college football playoffs just concluded. I think the last time we sat here and talked to you all was about a couple weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 days before the college football semifinals, and I think I picked Alabama and Notre Dame. I was 50% on that. Alabama with a big victory over Oklahoma. But I want to touch on the Notre Dame game first. I really thought Notre Dame had a chance to beat Clemson. I felt like Notre Dame's offense, with their big, tall, physical receivers, with Ian Book at quarterback, playing as well as he played this year. I had said a couple times during the season that last year in 2017, Notre Dame was 6-1 at one time after losing to Georgia early in the season. They beat Southern Cal at home in a big convincing victory. They beat North Carolina State, which had been ranked 13th. And then they went to Miami on a Saturday night and got blown out. And then they lost to Stanford the last game of the season in 2017. So this year, after the big win against Stanford at South Bend that my producer Nathan and I went to see, I said, okay, they're 5-0, but let's see how they respond now. They've got to go to Virginia Tech. They've got to go to Northwestern. Let's see if they can avoid the same type of letdown they had against Miami in 2017. And they did. I mean, they came out against Virginia Tech in a very hostile environment, against a Virginia Tech team that was pretty good at the time. Their season went downhill after that. And Notre Dame beat them rather convincingly. They went to Northwestern and handled them rather convincingly. They went to Yankee Stadium and played Syracuse in a game that many of the media experts said that Notre Dame was going to lose. That was their upset special if Notre Dame was going to get beat, was going to be that game. And Notre Dame beat them like 36-3. So I thought, okay, maybe this Notre Dame team is for real. And then they go to Southern Cal, last game of the season. Little bit of a hiccup there. They were down by 7 at halftime, that they were able to correct the problems, and they were able to come back and win that football game. So they ended up 12-0. So I looked at Notre Dame as a whole. They finally had a quarterback. They hadn't had a really good passing quarterback since Brady Quinn in the mid-2000s. They hadn't really had a great one since Joe Montana. So they had a quarterback. Their running game was strong as usual. Their defense, I felt, was better than the defense they had in 2012. As far as passing efficiency, they had only given up 7 passing touchdowns all season long. So I thought, Clemson's got some better athletes than Notre Dame. Their defensive line at Clemson was, all 4 of those guys were NFL caliber. So I thought, if there's one problem Notre Dame's going to have against Clemson, it's probably going to be running the football consistently. But I felt like they could make that up with some short passes, with some misdirection type runs, kind of keep Clemson honest with the running game, and then throw it to those big, tall, physical receivers. Well, for a quarter, it seemed to work pretty well. But I think the problem with Notre Dame in that game was not so much that they couldn't compete with Clemson. And most of the Notre Dame haters, especially the media, now the storyline is, Notre Dame should have never been in that game. We said all along they weren't one of the 4 best teams in the country. Well, that's hogwash, okay? I mean, Notre Dame deserved to be in that football game, and they still are one of the best teams in the country. But the problem is, for some reason, and I don't know if this is coaching, I don't know if it's the type of player they've got, they just can't seem to come up big in big games. I thought they had gotten over that this year, but then they get against Clemson, and the 2 things that really concerned me early on, the game was 3-3 at the end of the first quarter, but the running back, Dexter Williams, fumbled like the second time he touched the ball. Luckily, he was able to recover his own fumble. The next possession, the quarterback Book fumbles and loses it. A couple possessions later, their receivers dropped open passes, just basically without, just no concentration, just dropped them. Book threw passes that were totally uncharacteristic of the kind he'd been throwing all year long. So it's almost like they either didn't believe in the game plan, or for some reason they just could not overcome those jitters of playing in that game. I don't know what it is, but for some reason they didn't. Then they had some key injuries. Julian Love, their All-American corner, went out early in that game in the first half, and right away Clemson took advantage of his backup and threw a couple touchdown passes over that guy's head. Well, that tells me that Notre Dame does have a lot of first-line talent, but they don't have quite the talent and depth that a Clemson or an Alabama or maybe a Georgia has. So, I feel bad for Notre Dame, obviously, because I went to school there, but I think that if the one thing this is going to do, it's going to hurt them a little bit next year, because if they find themselves in this situation again where they're undefeated, unless the dominoes fall exactly right, they're going to be jumped by a one-loss team, because the committee's going to say, hey, Notre Dame really cannot perform in these games. So we'll see. I hope that doesn't happen, but I'm afraid Notre Dame's going to suffer a little bit from this performance, even though I don't think it was a function of them not being a good team. I think it was a function of them maybe not having that hard enough edge to come out and play in that game. But either way, it was a loss, and Notre Dame was out. The night game kind of went as I expected. Alabama, they jumped on Oklahoma. I mean, I think I had just sat down and got up and went to the bathroom and got something to drink, and it was like 28-0 before I knew it. But they just jumped on Oklahoma quickly. After that, they took their foot off the gas a little bit, tried to run the football and work the clock. and I think the game ended up 45-34, somewhere in that vicinity. The interesting thing that I think we saw come the championship game, but I think we didn't realize it in the semifinal game, was Alabama's defense. As much as they took their foot off the gas offensively against Oklahoma in the second half, their defense should not have done that. And Oklahoma was able to figure out their defense and put points on the board in the second half. A lot of points on the board in the second half. And that was kind of an omen of things to come when we got to the championship game. But Oklahoma obviously was not good enough to beat Alabama. Their defense could not stop Alabama. And in the second half, whenever Alabama needed to score to match an Oklahoma score, they were able to do that. And they took care of Oklahoma rather easily. And that set up the championship game between Alabama and Clemson, which most everybody picked Alabama. I picked Alabama to win that game. It started off kind of strange. Tua, the quarterback for Alabama, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. Everybody knows him as Tua, throws a pick six early on, and Clemson's up 7-0. But then Alabama gets the ball back, and they throw a 56-yard touchdown pass. Perfect pass, perfect catch and run, and it's 7-7. But then Clemson comes back and scores, and it's 14-7. Alabama comes back and scores, misses the extra point. Now it's 14-13. So this is all happening like within one quarter or a little more than one quarter of the game. So you're thinking, hey, one, this game's going to go on to like 1 in the morning, and two, it's probably going to be like 60-50. Then Alabama kicks a field goal and goes up 16-14. So you're thinking, okay, this game is kind of going how we expected, and Alabama's going to start to put the pedal to the metal. Well, it didn't really turn out that way. After that, it was over. Clemson takes it and scores, goes up 21-16. They score again, 28-16. And then in the span of 2 drives in the second half, Alabama drives down on one. In fact, they turn it over twice, once on downs and once, I think, on an interception, deep in Clemson territory. The play calling was atrocious. One on a 4th down, and I think it was 4th and 4. They run a quarterback sweep with Tua on a bad ankle, and they stop him for no gain. Another time on 4th down, they fake a field goal. Now, I'm not opposed to faking a field goal, but when you have your kicker run an ISO with the holder as your lead blocker on a 4th and 4, that's not exactly the smartest play to run against Clemson on a fake field goal, especially when Clemson had their field goal safe defense in. They didn't have their field goal or extra point defense in. They had their defensive safe team, which means they had defensive players, regular defensive players on the field. So if you're going to run a fake, either run a better fake or just go for it. Just line up in your offense and go for it. So I thought that was poor coaching on Saban's part, which, normally we don't see Nick Saban get out coached, but obviously he did on that one. And then those 2 or 3 drives in the second half where Alabama couldn't convert deep in Clemson territory, the Alabama defense, and go back to what I said in the semifinal against Oklahoma, the Alabama defense was not quite up to par. Their secondary didn't play very well. They were falling down. They were missing assignments. Clemson was throwing the ball over their heads quite a bit, and Clemson just seemed to score at will. So, my takeaway from that game is the same as the Notre Dame game. Just like I said, Notre Dame was not as bad as they looked. I still think they're one of the best teams in the country, and Alabama still may be the best team in the country. They just did not play very well against Clemson. I think had Alabama played as well as they could have defensively and even offensively, and I think Tua was still hurting. I think his ankle was still messed up. But either way, I think Alabama's still one of the best teams, if not the best team. But I got to take my hats off to Clemson. I think that they're by far the best team in the country this year. They've got a tremendous team. Their defensive line is just unbelievable. But obviously some of those guys, if not most of them, are going to head to the NFL this year. I think one, Dexter Lawrence, the guy that got suspended for the failed drug test, has already declared that he's foregoing his senior year to go on to the NFL, which was expected. So an interesting playoff. I think next year, as we move into 2019, it'll be rather interesting to see what happens. I think you got to put Alabama and Clemson right back up there. I think Oklahoma will be back up there. I think Ohio State will be back up there. I think Notre Dame will be back up there. They're losing Julian Love, their All-American corner, has announced that he's going to the NFL early. So has Miles Boykin, their tall receiver, is going to the NFL. Elise Mack, one of their tight ends, is going to the NFL. So they're going to lose 3 or 4 guys to early NFL commitment. as well as seniors that are graduating. So they'll have to replace those guys. But their quarterback's back. Most of their offensive line is back. A lot of their defensive guys are back. I think Notre Dame will be pretty good next year. Will they go undefeated again? Hard to say. They got to go to Georgia. They got to go to Michigan. They got to go to Stanford. It's not going to be an easy schedule next year. So again, I doubt they'll go undefeated, which will probably preclude them from getting into the playoff again. But I think they'll have a good year. So they'll be in the mix as well. But it'll be the same characters: Alabama, Clemson, Georgia will be back up there. Ohio State, Notre Dame. I think you're going to see a lot of those teams up there. LSU should be pretty good next year. I think Michigan will be pretty good next year. So it's pretty much the same teams that you saw this year. I don't see any dark horses coming in that were not very good this year that all of a sudden will make a big jump into next year. So college football season concluded and ready for the college football season in 2019. Okay, before we go on, I want to take a minute and talk about our sponsor, Bonus Room Art. Don't think we talked a lot about them last time, but I want to make a quick mention about them. www.bonusroomart.com. We've mentioned them quite a bit on our 30 episodes of the Press Box podcast. Check them out. Lots of great prints. Nathan Miranda, our producer, does a tremendous job. You can buy those prints on the website. He's got some different tabs that give you some information on how he goes about drawing those things. It's really, really a great website, and they do a great job, and they're a great friend of the Pressbox podcast. You can go directly to www.bonusroomart.com. You can also get there through my blog, theoldlinebacker.com. That's theoldlinebacker, one word, .com. At the bottom of that blog, there's a link that you can go right to bonusroomart.com. I also want to talk a little bit about a new YouTube series that our producer started. We mentioned it once before as well, Mascots and Monikers. Nathan put up 2 tremendous videos on how the University of Notre Dame became known as the Fighting Irish and how the Tennessee Volunteers became known as the Volunteers. So those were up there, but those were kind of prototypes, if you will, just to kind of see how it would work. But we're revamping that Mascots and Monikers series, and we'll have that out here in a few weeks. And that YouTube channel is called Mascots and Monikers. You can go right to it on YouTube. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and that way you'll get notifications every time a new one pops up. We've got about 7 or 8 in the can we're ready to go with. We're just getting our studio set and getting ready for filming, and it should be a tremendous, tremendous series that we hope can be used for promotion in some other areas as well. But something that I think most college football or pro football fans or sports fans in general will enjoy, because sometimes we don't always realize how our favorite teams got the names that they got, or how our favorite teams were associated with the mascots that they have. So check that out as well, Mascots and Monikers, a YouTube channel. Okay, so we're back on the Press Box podcast now. We've talked a little college football. Now it's time to talk some NFL football. The NFL playoffs, week 1 is in the bank. We start, remember, with 12 teams. We've got wild card weekend, where your top 2 seeds in each conference get a bye. So in the NFC, the Saints and the Rams had the byes. Saints were the number 1 seed. The Rams were 2. In the AFC, the Chiefs and the Patriots got the bye. Chiefs were 1, Patriots were 2. So the way the seeding broke itself out, in the NFC, you had the Bears sitting at the number 3 seed. So they hosted the 6th seed, the wild card team, the Eagles, who were the defending Super Bowl champs, and the 4th seed, the Dallas Cowboys, who won the NFC East. The Bears won the NFC North. So the Cowboys at the 4th seed hosted the 5th seed, the other wild card team, the Seattle Seahawks. Let's talk about the NFC first. On Saturday night, the Cowboys and the Seahawks did battle in Dallas, and it was really kind of an interesting game. Russell Wilson is probably, you'd have to admit, one of the top 4 or 5 quarterbacks in the NFL right now. I mean, what he's been able to do with that football team, especially the last few years with their lack of receiving threats, and up until this year, their lack of a running game has been nothing short of miraculous. I mean, the guy runs the ball quite a bit. When they put the ball in his hands, he makes things happen. And you got to give Seattle credit this year. They started out 0-2. And after that, they made a commitment to run the football. They said, we're going to be a running football team. So what they did is they ran the football, and at the end of the season, when the dust had settled, they were averaging over 160 yards rushing a game. So they were winning on running the ball on first and second down, throwing it on third down with short passes to get the first down. So they go to Dallas against a team that, right now Dallas, whether you like them or not, has kind of built a team with really tremendous athletes. I mean, their defense is probably the best they've had in at least 25 years. Their defensive line is fast, they're quick. They put lots of pressure on the quarterback. They've got two wonderful young linebackers in Jalen Smith from Notre Dame and Van Der Esch, the guy from Boise State, who took Sean Lee's spot when Sean Lee got hurt. I think his name is Kyle Van Der Esch. Just two young, tremendous, fast linebackers. And the thing that they do so well is they flow to the ball so well, sideline to sideline, but they play downhill. And you don't see a lot of that in the NFL. These guys played downhill. So the Dallas defense is pretty tough. But the interesting thing about that game is Seattle hung in there. I mean, it was Seattle actually had the lead 14-10 late in the third quarter. Dallas scored a touchdown, stopped Seattle, scored another touchdown, and was up 24-14. And then with 2:08 left in the game, Seattle took the ball and moved right down the field. One on a huge pass down the sideline. I think it was like a 60 or 70-yard pass. And then they went for two and got it. So they were within two there. And the interesting thing about that game is they scored to make it 24-22 Seattle with 1:08 left in the game. Now, they had no timeout, so you knew an onside kick was coming. But anybody who watched the game realized that right before the half, Seattle decided to try like a 59-yard field goal. And their kicker is Sebastian Janikowski, who right now is, he's almost 40 years old. In fact, he might quite be 40 years old now. He's a little overweight, probably not in the best shape that you'd want your kicker to be in. So he tries his field goal, and I guess he tried to put just a little too much leg into it than he had, and he pulled a groin muscle or a hamstring or something. You could tell he was limping around right after the kick. Well, he comes out in the second half in street clothes, so now Seattle doesn't have a kicker. So their punter has to kick. Well, he can't place kick, the punter, so they had to go for two every time they scored. He can't kick off, so he had to use drop kicks. He drop kicked the kickoffs after their scores. And he couldn't kick extra points, as I said, or field goals. Well, after they scored to make it 24-22 with 1:08 left, they have to try an onside kick. Well, he can't do that. So he drop kicks it and kicks it like 30 yards. And the Dallas guy is just right there, makes a fair catch and catches the ball. So obviously Seattle had no chance to win that game because they had no chance of recovering an onside kick because there really wasn't an onside kick. So anyway, that's beside the point. That was a little bit of a story on how that game played out. But my takeaway from that game is Dallas is probably a little better than we thought. But then again, maybe a little bit deceiving because as Seattle is not a very good football team. They run it very well, but they can't throw it very well. And their defense is not what it was. And Dallas struggled to beat them at home. So regardless, Dallas now with that win goes to Los Angeles. They'll play the Rams this Saturday night in the Coliseum. The other NFC game, the Bears against the Eagles. Everybody was picking the Bears to win. I think they were 6.5-point favorites. I had a feeling Philadelphia would at least cover the spread, if not win. And the way that game started out, I kind of had a feeling Philadelphia was going to win because the interesting thing about that is the Bears have arguably the best defense in the NFL this year, without a doubt. They've just got a tremendous pass rush. They've got a tremendous secondary. They've got two great linebackers. They've got that defensive end Mack that they got from the Oakland Raiders, and what's his first name again? Khalil Mack. That's right. Khalil Mack. That they got from the Oakland Raiders. So, great defense. Their offense is serviceable, but Mitchell Trubisky in his second year, and while I think he's going to be a very good quarterback, obviously he's not, at the level of a quarterback that's going to lead you to a Super Bowl. And the Bears had trouble against the Eagles all night long moving the football, and their defense, believe it or not, could not get pressure on Nick Foles. The Eagle offensive line did a tremendous job on Khalil Mack. I think they got 1 or 2 sacks, but that was about it. Nick Foles did a great job, as he usually does, of spreading the ball around. And that's the interesting thing about the Eagles is that while Carson Wentz is their starter, and while he's probably a better athlete and a better quarterback than Nick Foles does a better job of getting everybody on that offense involved. When Wentz was the quarterback, it seems like Zach Ertz got most of the passes. Well, Foles throws it to Ertz. He throws it a little bit. He throws it out to all the wide receivers they've got. He spreads it around, okay? He spreads it around. And that's the thing that Wentz did not do a good job of, only because what Wentz can do better than Foles is he can run. So if his first or second read wasn't open, he's more likely to roll out and try to make a play with his legs, where Foles has to stay in and throw it to Aguilar, throw it to Ertz, throw it to these guys all the guys that are involved in the offense. So anyway, Philadelphia hung close. The Bears took a lead late in the game. Philadelphia drove down, scored with about 6 seconds left in the game, or not 6 seconds, with about 50 seconds left in the game. And the Bears were able to drive down and get in position for a field goal. And then we all know what happened with Cody Parkey. He made the first field goal, but the Eagles had called timeout. The second one, which now the NFL is saying officially was a blocked field goal because they did get their fingers on it, but nonetheless it hit the upright twice. Hit the upright, then hit the crossbar, and then bounced out. So the Bears have been bounced out. So the Eagles now, the NFC playoffs are set. The Eagles will go to New Orleans, and the Cowboys will go to Los Angeles. And these games are going to be rather interesting because, if you look at the Saints-Eagles game, the Saints and the Eagles played each other in Week 11 in New Orleans. The Saints beat them 48-7. I mean, they just thrashed the Eagles in that game. The Saints were in their stride. They've had a great year. But Carson Wentz was the quarterback. Now, am I saying that it's going to be different because Nick Foles is the quarterback? I don't know. But the interesting thing is, when you beat a team 48-7, there's two dynamics that happen there. If you're the team that got beat 48-7, you're going to change things up, right? I mean, because what you did obviously didn't work. So you're going to change things up and look for a new plan. If you're the team that won 48-7, then your thoughts are, well, do we really try and change anything? I mean, we won by 41 points with what we were doing. Why change anything? So the advantage goes to the team that got beat, I think. It's not going to be 48-7 Sunday in New Orleans. It's going to be a close game. Do I think the Eagles have a chance to beat the Saints? They're the defending champs. They knocked out the Bears in Chicago. Never count out the defending champs until they get beat. So, yeah, I think they've got a chance. But I think if New Orleans comes out and plays their type of game, if they give Drew Brees some time, if their defense plays like they're capable of playing, I really think it's going to be hard for the Eagles to go into the Dome against a rested team that's had a bye, that's had a week to prepare, and beat the Saints in New Orleans. So I think it's going to be a close game, but I think the Eagles are going to win in a very close game. Cowboys-Rams, that's a tough one. The interesting thing about that game is even though it's in Los Angeles, the fans in the stands is probably going to be 60-40 in favor of the Cowboys. The Cowboys train in Oxnard, California, and the Rams were in St. Louis for many years, from about 95 until about 2 or 3 years ago. So during that time, Los Angeles being so close to New Mexico, and actually fairly close to Texas if you want to look at geographic, the Cowboys are a national team. They have fans all over, but they have more in Southern California than they have anywhere else. One, because of the vacuum of no football there for so many years, and two, because of the fact that they train there in training camp. So it's not going to be like they're playing a road game. Dallas is going to have the same, if not more, fans pulling for them than the Rams do. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic in that game. The Rams have struggled here over the last 5 or 6 weeks. They came out of the gate 8-0, and since then they've been 4-4. So it's really going to be interesting to see if they can turn it up a notch. Last year we thought that that they were going to be able to win a playoff game. They opened against the Falcons in the wild card round and got beat at home. So we'll see if they're going to beat the Cowboys. I think it's going to be a really, really close game. I think if I'm going to lean anywhere, I'm actually going to lean to the Cowboys upsetting the Rams in that game because I just think the Cowboys are hitting their stride, and I think Dak Prescott is a better quarterback than a lot of people give him credit for. He's not going to throw for 400 yards. He's not going to throw 4 or 5 touchdowns in a game. He's going to hand it off to Ezekiel Elliott. He's going to throw it to Amari Cooper. He's going to throw it to some of these guys underneath, to his tight ends, and he's going to use his legs when he has to make plays. So I think the Cowboys are going to win that game, as much as I hate to say it, because I'd like to see the Rams advance. So I think the NFC Championship game is going to be in New Orleans, and it's going to be the Saints hosting the Cowboys. Now let's look at the AFC real quickly. The AFC games last week, we had the Colts at the Texans first on Saturday, and then we had the Chargers at the Ravens on Sunday. 2 interesting matchups. The Colts at the Texans. Well, The Texans have been in the playoffs quite a bit over the last 5 or 6 years. Seems like they're always that early Saturday game. And I think the reason is because, one, they're not as big of a draw as some of these other teams. And two, they don't seem to have exactly good playoff caliber. I don't think they've won a playoff game, maybe one over the last 4 or 5 that they've been in. So, and again, it was a bad matchup for the Texans because one, their quarterback, Deshaun Watson, has had a great season. He's not the kind of guy that's going to play out of the pocket, though, and put the team on his back and throw the ball deep down the field. He's going to use his legs to beat you when he has to. In fact, he had been the most sacked quarterback in the NFL coming into that game, and that's why they try to get him on the edge with this RPO that you've heard a lot of lately, the run-pass option, to use his legs. Well, the Colts had a great defensive game plan. They had a tremendous game plan, and they were able to shut him down early. The Texans' defense couldn't stop the Colts. I mean, the Colts scored on their first 3 possessions and was 21-0 before the Texans could really do anything late in the game. They were able to score a touchdown, make it 21-7. They did get it down there again and turned it over on downs. But the Colts really played a tremendous game. And I think the Colts are really the dark horse in the AFC. I say that because if you look at the way they're constructed right now, their defense, they've got this linebacker, young rookie linebacker, Leonard, who led the NFL in tackles, playing linebacker. They've got a tremendous defensive line. Their secondary is very strong. But if you look at their offense, they rebuilt their offensive line. They got a rookie guard who made the Pro Bowl, made All-Pro. Not only the Pro Bowl, but he was All-Pro. Rookie guard out of Notre Dame, Quentin Nelson. They got a tackle in the second round. That's a rookie tackle that's starting at left tackle. So their offensive line is giving Andrew Luck protection. They're giving him time. He's been sacked less this year than any of the previous years he's been in the NFL. Andrew Luck has one of the strongest arms in the NFL. You saw that. His throws were pinpoint throws, tight spirals, right on the money. Their running game with I think his last name is Mack. I can't remember his first name right now, but I'll find out. But the running back, number 25, Mack. I mean, he was just awesome running that football. So I think the Colts are probably, I think, the team that's playing the best right now in the NFL. They started out 1-5. Since then, the Colts are 10-1. And that's pretty strong when you look at the type of caliber of opposition that you play in the NFL. So the Colts won that game, and by virtue of that win, the Colts will go to Kansas City this weekend in the divisional round. In the other game, I made the mistake. The Los Angeles Chargers went to Baltimore to play the Ravens. Again, we had another scenario that I talked about in the upcoming Eagles-Saints game. About, I guess it was the Saturday before Christmas, the Ravens went to Los Angeles to play the Chargers, and they beat the Chargers in Los Angeles. So now you had a rematch. So the team that lost, the Chargers, had to change something up. The Ravens figured, hey, what we did was successful. Let's do the same thing. Well, the Chargers had a tremendous game plan. And what they did was, which this probably took a lot of sales effort on the defensive coordinator's part, but they played with 7 safeties in that game. They put safeties in the linebacker position, and what their goal was they were going to stop Lamar Jackson from running the football. The goal was to stop the run. So they put faster, quicker guys as opposed to linebackers who generally are pretty fast, but they're not as fast as safeties and corners. So they put these guys in there, and it was brilliant. Lamar Jackson was not able to run. The Ravens' running game was shut down, and the Ravens' defense played tremendous. They held the Chargers to 3 field goals in the first half. They were in that game till the end. Finally, the Chargers were able to push a touchdown across, and they were able to get a 23-3 lead. And then they started playing a little soft, the Chargers. The Ravens came back, but really the game was never in doubt. And then Lamar Jackson fumbled the ball on the last possession there with no timeouts to end the game, and the Chargers won at 23-17. But it really wasn't as close as the score indicated. It was more the Chargers figuring out the Ravens. And Lamar Jackson is going to be a good quarterback. And I know after the game, John Harbaugh committed to him as their quarterback and basically said that they were going to trade Joe Flacco in the offseason. But he's going to have to get a lot better, Lamar Jackson. I mean, he can run the ball as good as any of them, but his passing game is going to have to get a lot better, because when you face a team like the Chargers that shut down your running game, if you can't throw it, you're going to be in big trouble, especially come playoff time. So the Chargers move on. They'll go to New England to play the Patriots. So let's analyze those two games. We've got the Colts going to Kansas City to play the number 1 seed in the Chiefs. We've got the Chargers going to New England to play the number 2 seed in the Patriots. If you're into crazy stats, one of the crazy stats out there is that Tom Brady is 13-0 against all the quarterbacks that are left in the AFC playoffs, which I think is a ridiculous stat because Tom Brady doesn't play against the quarterbacks. Tom Brady plays against that team's defense. That team's quarterback plays against the Patriots' defense. Well, let's look at this matchup. Phillip Rivers has not beaten the Patriots in 7 tries. I think the last time they played them in the playoffs, if I'm not mistaken, was the 2007 playoffs. I think it was the 2007 playoffs. And in the AFC Championship game, where LaDainian Tomlinson pulled himself out of the game due to an injury, and Phillip Rivers played with a torn ACL, and they hung in there, but they lost the game to the Patriots in Foxborough. That was a different Patriots team. Younger Tom Brady, more weapons on that team. They had Randy Moss. They had a great defense. This year, the Patriots, they don't have those receivers anymore. They really don't have. They lost Josh Gordon to suspension. They've got Edelman. They've got these little scat back receivers that they like to throw to, but they don't have a deep threat to spread the field. Normally, Gronkowski's that guy. Gronkowski has not played up to par this year. I don't know if he's hurt. I don't know if he wants to retire. I don't know if he's lost his love for the game, but he's not the same guy. He's not the same Gronk that we've been used to seeing in past years. Brady has missed some throws. So I think if there's a year that the Patriots are vulnerable, it's this year. But again, as I said, never count out the champion. And even though the Patriots aren't the defending champion, when you have to go to Foxborough in January, you got to play 60 minutes if you're going to beat the Patriots. I think the Chargers have probably the most complete team in the NFL outside of the Colts right now with their roster. They're really not weak in any area. And what they were able to do in Baltimore against the Ravens Sunday convinced me that I think if they're going to get to a Super Bowl, if Phillip Rivers is going to get to a Super Bowl, this has got to be the year right now. And I think they can go in there and beat the Patriots. It's going to be 28 degrees. It's going to be windy. But they've got to establish the run. They've got to play great defense. They got to stay close in that game. And if they do, I think they'll have a chance to come out and win that football game. So my picks: I'm going to take the Chargers to upset the Patriots, and I'm going to take the Colts to beat the Chiefs. As much as I think the Chiefs have possibly the NFL MVP in Pat Mahomes, I still think that the Colts are one of the best teams in the NFL right now. So I think it's going to be Colts Chargers in the AFC Championship game, which will be interesting because it'll be the 2 wildcard teams, the 5th and 6th seed. And if that happens, the game will be at the StubHub Center in Carson, California, the home of the Los Angeles Chargers. So my picks for the NFC Championship: Dallas will go to New Orleans, and in the AFC Championship, I'm predicting the Colts will go to Los Angeles to take on the Chargers. So we'll see how that plays itself out. Last topic we want to talk about today is all the coaching changes in the NFL. If you follow the NFL at all, or even if you don't, if you just watch all the sports shows, ESPN or Fox or whatever, you know that there are 32 teams in the NFL, and 25% of the teams fired their coaches this year. So there were 8 job openings going into this offseason. Some of them are the ones that you always remember. The Browns were looking for a coach. Of course, they fired their coach in midseason. The Packers were looking for a coach. They fired their coach, Mike McCarthy, kind of towards the end of the season. The Dolphins, in a surprising move, fired Adam Gase as their coach after just 3 seasons and taking them to the playoffs one of those seasons. The Bengals fired their coach, Marvin Lewis. He had been the second longest tenured coach in the NFL behind Bill Belichick. I think he'd been there since 2003. But I think that was kind of a mutual firing. I think he was ready to leave the Bengals. The Cardinals fired their coach, Wilkes, after just 1 season. The Broncos fired their coach, Vance Joseph, after I think it was 1 season. May have been 2 seasons, if I'm not mistaken. So that was that one. The Jets fired Todd Bowles after 4 seasons, which you kind of would expected that was going to happen. So anyway, so you had a lot of openings. The Browns, we had the Packers, we had the Dolphins, we had the Bengals, we had the Cardinals, we had the Broncos, we had the Jets, and there was one other team that I'm missing here for some reason. I can't remember who it is right now, but it'll come to me. It'll come to me in just a minute. So we have lots of openings in the NFL. And the interesting thing about coaching searches in the NFL is that you never really know, who they're going to hire because, one, you've got the Rooney Rule. All right, what is the Rooney Rule? The Rooney Rule is a rule named after Art Rooney or Dan Rooney, the Pittsburgh Steelers owner, that said that in order to ensure that we have more minority candidates hired as coaches, the NFL teams are required to interview minority candidates. And that's a good thing. I mean, that forces them to at least give these guys an interview. And I think you had quite a few minority coaches in the NFL going into this season. Now, quite a few of them were also fired here at the end of this season. But that doesn't mean that they won't get hired somewhere else. So that's one reason why you really never know. And then two, the coaches in the NFL tend to get recycled a lot. I mean, it's not like, you get fired from an NFL job and you go away forever. They get recycled. They go back to being a coordinator, then they come back and they end up being another head coach again for another team. So it's really a strange business when you think about it, the way it all works. So let's look at some of these openings. The Packers obviously fired Mike McCarthy about midway through the season, and I think there was a rift between him and Aaron Rodgers. I think, Mike McCarthy, they say he had a stale offense. He really didn't change up a lot of the routes that the receivers were running. He didn't put in any new plays, and he was the guy calling plays. And I think Aaron Rodgers got a little bit stale in this, and he got a little bit upset that they weren't giving him more toys. They weren't giving him more tools to make a run for a Super Bowl. And Aaron Rodgers is not getting any younger. He's 35 years old, so that window is going to close pretty quickly for the Packers. So they went out and looked for a new coach. They ended up hiring Matt LaFleur, who was the offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans. And that was an interesting hire. He's never been a head coach. So, what's the reason for that? Well, we're going to get into some of that as we go on here a little bit later. Let's look at the Browns. The Browns, if you talk to experts, they would consider the Browns one of the premium jobs in the NFL right now. The Browns ended up 7-8-1. The last 2 years, they won one game in 2 years. They won 7 games this year. They got a rookie quarterback in Baker Mayfield. They got a solid defense. They got lots of talent. And what did the Browns do? They fired Hugh Jackson in the middle of the season. Greg Williams, their defensive coordinator, was the interim coach. They've released him now. And they hired Freddie Kitchens, who was the offensive coordinator. So the interesting thing about Freddie Kitchens is he wasn't even the offensive coordinator when this season started. He was the quarterback's coach. Well, when they fired Hugh Jackson, they also fired Todd Haley, the offensive coordinator. So they promoted Freddie Kitchens to offensive coordinator. He helps Baker Mayfield go on a 5-3 record run after the firing, and now they make him the head coach. Well, no experience there. I mean, is he going to be able to lead the Browns to the promised land? I don't know. We'll see. The New York Jets, they recently just hired Adam Gase, a retread. Adam Gase was just fired by the Dolphins 2 weeks ago, and the Jets now hire him. Most people thought the Jets were hire Mike McCarthy. In fact, rumors out of New York were that Mike McCarthy wanted to go to the Jets. They have a young quarterback, all right, in Sam Darnold. He'll be a second-year quarterback. They have some good young receivers. And anywhere you have a quarterback, you have a chance in the NFL. So Mike McCarthy wanted to go there. Why did they not hire him? Who knows? Maybe it was personnel issues. Maybe some of the people in the personnel department, such as the general manager or the director of pro personnel, didn't want an experienced guy, an older guy that's had so much clout and experience. Maybe they'd rather have a young guy in there that they can mold or whatever. And Adam Gase was an interesting hire, but then again, he came from the Dolphins, so he's played the Jets twice a year. I think the Dolphins were 5-1 against the Jets in the 3 years that Adam Gase was the head coach. So he knows how to beat the Jets. He knows a little bit about their weaknesses. So they're hoping that maybe he can turn that around when he's now coaching them. The Dolphins have been able to beat the Patriots. I think they've beaten the Patriots 2 or 3 times in Miami during Adam Gase's stay there. So that'll be interesting. So the Jets went with a guy that was familiar to them, a guy that's been in their division. The Cardinals probably made the most interesting hire of anybody when you think about it. The Cardinals went out and hired Cliff Kingsbury. Now, those of you who really don't follow football may not know who Cliff Kingsbury is. Cliff Kingsbury was the head football coach at Texas Tech. That's the only head football coaching job he's really had. Texas Tech fired him at the end of the season. I think his record was basically a 500 record at Texas Tech. Southern California, the University of Southern California hired him as their offensive coordinator. And for a while, they were blocking teams from NFL teams talking to him, but then they released him to talk to these teams, and the Cardinals hire him as their head coach. That's a head scratcher. I mean, here's a young guy. He's a young guy. He's had some success, but a 500 record at Texas Tech in the Big 12 is not overwhelming success. Why did they hire him? Well, they've got a young quarterback as well, Josh Rosen, rookie quarterback this year. He's their future. Cliff Kingsbury coached Baker Mayfield. Those of you who know a little bit about college football know that Baker Mayfield started at Texas Tech, and he was coached by Cliff Kingsbury. So, I think what you're seeing here, and I mentioned this a couple teams earlier, is there's a trend now in the NFL. One, you got to have the franchise quarterback, right? I mean, more so in the last 4 or 5 years than ever before. If you don't have a franchise quarterback, if you don't have a guy that not only can get the ball down the field, but a guy that has mobility and can move out of the pocket, can make plays with his legs when he has to, but looks first to throw out of the pocket. If you don't have that kind of guy, you're in trouble in the NFL. You're not going to go anywhere. If you have one of those guys, you need a coach that can relate to him, okay? A coach that can give him the type of offense that he can be successful with. So, why did the Jets hire Adam Gase? Well, one, he knew the Jets and he knew that division, but he also had a young quarterback in Tannehill at Miami that he was able to develop. So they feel he can develop Sam Darnold. Why did the Cardinals hire Cliff Kingsbury? Well, they think that he can develop Josh Rosen because he had some success with Baker Mayfield. Why did the Browns go with Freddie Kitchen? No experience at all. Guy wasn't even a coordinator. Well, because Baker Mayfield's there. He's had success with him. They want to keep that relationship going. So most of these teams are going to if they're going to err anywhere in this coaching search, they're going to err on the side of the guy that, one, has been an offensive guy, and two, has had a relationship with a quarterback, a relationship with a franchise-type quarterback, or a guy that has developed quarterbacks at any level. Interesting thing of the Packers, why did they go for Matt LaFleur? Well, he was the offensive coordinator at the Titans. He's been the guy that's been developing Marcus Mariota. Now, you can argue whether Mariota is where he should be after 4 or 5 years in the NFL, but the fact of the matter is he has progressed. And they feel that he can help Aaron Rodgers by bringing in some new ideas and some new offensive schemes or techniques. And also a guy that Aaron Rodgers is closer to Aaron Rodgers in age. I mean, that's another factor. Aaron Rodgers is 35, LaFleur is 39. Mike McCarthy was probably my age. He was probably close to 60. And, a lot of times these young guys today can't relate to these older coaches. I mean, you don't see many older coaches in the NFL anymore. The other team that I was forgetting was the Buccaneers. They went out and got Bruce Arians, which was kind of interesting because Bruce Arians just retired at the end of the 2017 season from the Cardinals. And now he gets back into coaching. He was doing some Fox analysis work on TV, and all you had to do was listen to him and to realize that he was never going to be a game analyst. So he went back to his first love. Interesting thing there, though, is the Cardinals had to trade to the Buccaneers a 6th-round draft pick in order to get the rights to hire Bruce Arians. And you may ask me why that's the case. Well, Bruce Arians had just retired 1 year before. And now he decided to go back into coaching. So when you retire, the team you retire from still owns your rights, whether you're a player or a coach. So that prevents teams or players from just saying, like, let's say I want to leave a team and I say, well, I'm going to retire. And then I sit out a year and the next year I go wherever I want to go. Well, that kind of circumvents the idea of contracts, doesn't it? So in order to keep that from happening again, from a coach saying, well, I'm just going to retire and then come back and coach a different team, the Cardinals had to trade draft picks to the Buccaneers. Interesting thing there, though, is that kind of the flip side of what I've been saying with coaches, young coaches relating to young players. Here you have now an older coach in Bruce Arians, who's in his 60s, with a younger quarterback in Jameis Winston. The Buccaneers are the other side of the coin. Jameis Winston needs some discipline. I mean, he needs an older guy to stand on his back and say, do it this way. He's been a turnover machine in his 4 years in the NFL. He's sporadic. He's not very disciplined in his throws and the way he runs that offense. They needed a guy like Bruce Arians to come in there and instill some discipline. So the Buccaneers kind of had to have it the other way. But you're not going to see many more defensive coaches become NFL coaches. The only one really that's happened is Vic Fangio, who was the Bears defensive coordinator, has now become the Broncos head coach, and that's interesting too because the Broncos don't have a quarterback. I mean, it's interesting because they really don't have a guy. They have Case Keenum, but I wouldn't call him the franchise quarterback, especially after his performance this year. So they've decided to go with a defensive guy that can build up that defense, and they figure, hey, if we can keep teams under 10 points, maybe we can win with the quarterback we've got. So lots of interesting dynamics there. The only two teams that have not hired a head coach yet are the Dolphins and the Bengals. And I think it'll probably be a little while before those two teams hire one, only because they're kind of dysfunctional franchises. I saw a stat today show you how dysfunctional. The Dolphins, since the year 2000, the Dolphins have had 14 head coaches. They're tied with the Browns for the most head coaches in the last 18 years. And the reason I bring that up is when you think of the Browns, you think of a dysfunctional franchise, right? But when you think of the Dolphins, you don't think of them as dysfunctional. And maybe that's because of all the success they had in the 70s with Don Shula, with the Dan Marino years. But they've been one of the most dysfunctional franchises. So it's going to take them a while to find somebody to come in there and turn that thing around. But either way, it's always interesting when we have coaching changes. And this is an interesting time of year as well. So lots going on, playoff time. Hopefully the next time we come to you, we will be further along in the NFL playoffs. We've got golf teeing it up now. We had the Century Tournament of Champions last week where all the winners of tournaments from the previous season played in this one. It's in Hawaii. I sure would like to be in Hawaii golfing right now. This weekend we've got the Hawaii Open, the Sony Hawaii Open, which will be the first full field event in the PGA Tour. So we got lots of golf coming up here as we start making the tour into Arizona and Florida and get close to the Masters. So lots to talk about. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Press Box Podcast. Hope you didn't get tired just listening to me. And next time, my other co-host, Joseph Miranda, hopefully will be back, and we will bring you more on the Press Box Podcast. Thanks for listening.